Well, hi there folks. Sorry, still haven't had a chance to maiden my Lidl Spitfire yet. The weather's just been first too cold and now too wet and windy. Or the Lidl Stumpy. I'm looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I've got a bit of a crazy idea. Now, you've probably seen these mini Lidl gliders in the shops around the same time as the Lidl gliders are in the stores. And you've probably seen that people have attempted to do RC conversions with them, but usually come up with a problem of power to weight ratio. So this video shows how I've combined one of these Lidl mini chuck gliders with a palm-sized mini drone and turned it into a 4-engined RC plane. So let's get on with the beginning of the story. So I had this idea to use one of my busted up mini drones. Now I've got a few of these in good nick, including this Drocon here, which is absolutely brilliant. You could check out my review of that on YouTube. But this one's a bit busted up. It still flies, but I reckon I could afford to sacrifice it in the interest of a little project. My brilliant idea is, seeing as how you've got a transmitter here and a receiver here and 4 propellers, dead lightweight, I'll show you that in a sec. The idea is to take off these 4 motors, incorporate them in this, incorporate the receiver in this, and then attempt to steer it and fly it by using differential thrust. Don't know how it's going to work, and it will obviously depend on, it will need to climb with full throttle, I can't even speak, and obviously then descend without the power on, which most models will do. But anyway, I think it could work. It's going to be a nice little mini engineering project because the motors are tiny, and this is a bit of a battered one anyway, as you can see. Look, it's had its day really. So it'll give me something to do, a bit of a challenge. Now weight wise, all up with the tiny little lipo in it, this is 22 grams. And now these gliders, amazingly enough, different weights. One of them is 34, the other one is 44. So I'm going to go with the lighter weight one, which looks pretty anyway. First step will obviously be to hollow this out and to dismantle this. Now I'm going to have to be very careful when I dismantle it to label which motors are which, because the idea being you put, how's it going to go? You want it to go left right. The idea is you put these 2 on one side and those 2 on the other side, so that when you go left right with this, you're powering or preferentiating these 2 or those 2. Don't know what happens if you go forward. Probably actually if you just go forward you probably get all of them, don't you? Yeah. We'll see how it works anyway. It's going to be a challenge, it'll be a bit of fun. So let's see how we get on with it. What else was I going to say? I was going to try and measure what the thrust of this was. I might do a little test, stick a couple of things on it and see just how much it will lift. Let's see if I can do that. Right, well that's 5 grams. Put a little strop around it and see if it'll lift that. Right, well I did some tests. It will lift 5 grams very easily, but it won't quite lift 13 grams. So probably lifts about 10 grams. So basically it will lift its own weight, 22 grams, plus 10 grams, which is 32 grams. All up weight when I finished was 35, so that's 35 to 50 thrust by my reckoning. Right, well I've marked the props in a circular fashion, anti-clockwise, and I've taken a picture so I know which are which. So the way these motors are going to be organised on the wing, the 2 at the back, numbers 2 and 4, will be at the furthest out extreme, so that when the right hand control is, they will have maximum turning effect, and numbers 1 and 3 will be closest to the fuselage. Well, I guess that's how it's going to work anyway. It remains to be seen. Now to get this apart straightforward enough, it's just a bunch of little tiny crosshead screws under here. So I'm going to take this apart. Got to get this gunk off here where I hot glued it to connect the battery, because that was a bit busted up. Right, I'll get on with that and see what's inside. Actually, now I remember what I'd done with this. I've actually put a tiny little micro switch there to turn it on and off. Turn the battery on and off, which is what that wire there is for. Right, well, I don't know how I'm going to break this off. Hot glue, no, whatever it was, liquid metal, doesn't want to come off. Anyway, I will endeavour to get this apart, and then the real engineering challenge begins. I can take that out for a start. Right, well, I actually got the switch off, my on-off switch, and now let's get on and take out these screws. First job, find a screwdriver that will actually fit these tiny little screws. I think this one does. Oh yeah, I think I'm right, and we have liftoff. And the motors come out with, right, that comes out like that. Something's stopping that one. Yeah, we have liftoff, Houston. This is what we've got. That's the board. That's the 4 motors. Just like that. And I think to get these off, in fact I'll probably use that part of the plastic there. I'll probably cut that there and cut that so that I can use that as part of my engine mount. And what I'm planning to do is use that incorporated in the foam wing to hold the motor. Right, I'll cut this up. The point of no return. This is Bye Bye Drone. And as it happens, these are actually marked AB, AB. Right, so here we are, we have the makings of a radio controlled aircraft. I do plan actually to leave these prop guards on, try and mount them so they're glued on downwards, because I built another similar thing converting a wind up throw biplane, and I kept losing props every time I tried to fly it because the props had hit the ground and they just fall off. Right, on to the next step. Hollow this out and then think how I'm going to hollow this through, and then think how I'm going to mount these motors. It's going to look pretty cool anyway, even if it doesn't fly. Well, looking at this more closely, now I've kind of extended it out, I can see the trickiest bit is going to be extending these wires to the 4 motors once I've hollowed this out and installed them. And looking at the width of this, which I can't really change, I think it will just about go across there. Maybe just about. I don't want to. I could risk breaking the circuit board here, but I don't know whether I'm going to be able to solder back to it. No, if I break that, then all will be lost. So somehow I've got to get that inside there too. Right, going to be fun. Right, well, I've got the fuselage hollowed out using my special wire coat hanger, bent wire coat hanger tool, and you can just go through and slice it like butter like this. Right then, so we could see a problem here. The width of this is only about so much. Maximum I might get it to about this, but the width of this is more, as you can see. But I came up with a solution, came up with an idea. As you can see, each arm has got just basically 2 connections that go to the positive and negative for the motors. They're actually even marked on there, plus and minus. I figured if I scrape away the lacquer on here, I can snip these across here and solder directly onto this little board, and then it'll only be that wide, which should fit nicely inside there. Yeah, I reckon so. That one's a bit trickier, it's got a component there, some kind of voltage reg or something. Still gives me the opportunity to chop 3. Yeah, I think it will still fit. It'll still fit even if I chop that there. Right, so my scraping away the lacquer and giving it and tinning it just here has worked, as you can see. And I've actually marked it here 1, 2, 3 blobs, 1 blob, so that I know which bits go where when I do finally disconnect these. Although having said that, I know the orientation because I took a picture of it, and it's all relative to where the power lead is. Right, so the next step will be to solder some extension wires on. But I've marked on the board here 1 blob, which was that one, so I know which pairs are which. Right, so find some very fine wire to go on here now then. Right, so some wire to actually connect up these motors. Now this kind of telephone extension wire I've found is absolutely perfect for these kind of jobs because it's a very fine gauge and very flexible. So cut some up, split the wire, and here you go. This is what you get. And I happen to have a couple of old extension leads kicking around, so and there you go. You've got 4 lovely different coloured strands. Sorted. Right, well, I've figured how I'm going to mount the motors on the wing. Snip these off from the original frame. Like that. And then I'm going to melt or cut a little hole, insert that into the wing. That'll make it easier to mount the motors. Got the option then of screwing those on because you've got the little screw holes here. Right, that's going to be fun. Right, well, there's one down. Just melted a slight slot in it with my homemade cutting tool, and that slots in nicely. I shall try and get them so they're pointing the right way as well. Okay, one down, 3 more to go. Actually, looking at that there, that slides in nicely into that. Wires will come out the side. But looking at that stuck into the wing, yeah, looking at it like that, I don't think it really needs the prop guard. So I'm going to cut that bit off too. But the good thing about using these mounts is there's a tiny little screw that goes in there which will hold the front mount on and actually hold it in place, because I was wondering how I'd actually secure it into the wing. That's going to work slowly. Right, well, I've trimmed the board small as I can get it on the corners there. One or two places there are components there right close to the edge, so I couldn't go too far. Extended the wires. The motors will be in these positions. I've actually marked on the board too. That's got 1 blob, 2, 3 blobs, 4, whatever. 2 blobs, 3 blobs, 4 blobs. Pretty important to get them in the right place because some of these props are left hand, some are right hand. That's the way it works on drones. Anyway, next job. I've hollowed this out and it is just wide enough to take that board tucked in there. And I'm going to pass the wires through here on either side. Hook up the motors to make sure they're still working before I finally trim them up and finish this off. So, wish me luck with that. Very fragile connections here. The wire is such a tiny gauge that every time I move it, it keeps snapping them off. But anyway, makes no odds, I just solder them back again. Okay, that's it for now. Don't go away. Well, as you can see, progress has been made. And it was a tricky job getting this in here, but because the solder connections on these tiny little pins here broke off quite a few times and I had to resolder. If I was doing it all over again, I wouldn't wire the leads from that little tiny board in a star shape. I would actually wire them all in that direction. But you live and learn with these experimentals. So wires are all coming out the bottom here. It's just a question now of gluing these little things in here and connecting up the motors. I've been through and tested that each one of these is still actually working before I take that step, because I'm going to have to solder directly to these tiny little wires here. Right, so that's pretty much the next job, or the last job. And you may have noticed I've actually marked these pairs of wires, 4 blobs there, prop number 4, because like I say, they are kind of contra-rotating and different left and right handed, so I know which props go where. So it's now just a question of gluing these in these tiny things screw into these. I might leave the prop guards on just the outers there so that when it lands, props have got a bit of protection. Right, so that's the next step coming up. Right, well, I'm just about to give a tiny little tab of hot glue there, either side, but try and leave it in such a way that I can still take out this tiny little screw and pull the motor out if I need to. That's what I'm going to try and do anyway. Right. Well, I must say that was one of the trickiest soldering jobs I've ever done. Especially this one, because like a fool I cut the wires from the motor too short. So basically, oh, this one here wasn't much to actually solder to, and the wires came off 2 or 3 times. I had to resolder that inside because I've put a blob of glue there, because every time I moved the board slightly the wires were breaking. Anyway, is it working? That's the question. Whoa, look at the thrust there, look. Bit of a sluggish motor here, but it might be because the batteries are a bit flat. But the props are rotating the right ways. And if I go left, right, it's working. I think the battery's a bit flat, which is why it's flashing occasionally. But that appears to be working. Don't know if I'm going to be brave enough to actually throw it. But that was the trickiest little job I've ever done. Oh, look at that! I've managed to melt that anyway. In soldering, I managed to hit that with the hot soldering iron and bend that anyway. So yeah, hollowed that out a bit more, because the idea being that the LiPo can sit up here. Not sure. Right, I think I've got the centre of gravity about right with that battery there. It's not far from it. I think I need to charge the batteries, both in the transmitter and the receiver, and give it a proper little test. And I think really it's a shame I didn't actually chop the tops of those off, but I'm not going to mess around with it now. And now that I know the motors are spinning the right way, I can put some shrink over the solder joints. Actually, I forgot to put them on that one. Oh, silly boy. Or they've fallen off before I soldered it. Yeah. So I've got some shrink to put over these, and then I'm just going to tape them down. Simple as that. And if I put on, there's some decals that came with this. If I put the decals on underneath, that'll cover all that up. Yeah, or some tape or something. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. I don't know whether it's going to fly, but anyway, it's kept me busy over Christmas. It's kind of gone together quite well, really. A little tiny 4-engined mini Lidl glider. Right, let's tidy that up and charge the batteries. Well, hi there folks, batteries are charged. Let's summarise this rather tricky build, probably one of the trickiest things I've ever attempted to put together. First thing is, big learning curve. I didn't expect a drone this size to actually have a gyro in it and know whether it was on level ground, because as soon as I'd actually finished this I noticed sometimes it wouldn't bind. And I put that down to the fact that I didn't quite have the board in the right plane. So I've just snibbed the little bits of hot glue I put on it and put it in the right plane, and now when I hook up, I'll show you in a sec, it does actually bind. Because first off I thought I destroyed the board. When it wouldn't bind I thought you've done some damage, and in fact there were so many broken solder joints. Every time I moved this there was a broken solder joint, so I've now actually put blobs of hot glue there, blobs of hot glue there, remade these joints so many times, even had to reach right in there and resolder those right at the back because I couldn't risk moving the whole board again. Anyway, touch wood, working at the moment, and you'll see in a second it will fire up and bind. Overall weight is nearly 50 grams. I think it should be enough to fly it. But the other effect of this gyro, as you'll see when I fire it up, is if it goes slightly off flat, it has a tendency to correct. So basically that's why these little drones hover so beautifully, because once they're in the right plane they will sit there quite nicely. Now that could be an advantage flying this, because I think it should make it self-leveling. My big concern was before, with the board slightly inclined the wrong way, I was having to bind it in that plane, which meant that was probably the attitude it was trying to find. Now I've levelled the board out a bit and it's in this plane, I'm kind of hoping once it's in level flight, it will actually stay in level flight. The control idea seems to work, apart from the fact, as you'll see when I fire it up, that when you point the nose up, the props actually speed up, it appears. But with a bit of luck, it might be flyable. The left-right bit seems to work anyway. So I'll fire it up. Let's hope it binds. It was such a worry when it wouldn't bind, because I thought I'd destroyed it after all this work putting it together and so many wires breaking on my little circuit board. I felt pretty sure I'd destroyed it. Anyway, plug in the battery, turn on, and with luck those red lights will go solid. And they have. What do you know? Okay, oh, another thing to mention, I was a bit concerned that it might end up tail heavy. Well, in fact, with the LiPo in there, 250mm LiPo, it actually is just about right. COG probably about a third of the way across there. And on that point, it's the first time I've taken one of these apart, but the same as with the big Lidls, there was actually a little counterweight buried in there. You couldn't see it, but when I hollowed this out, I discovered ball bearing. So the LiPo takes the place of that, and really, no, I think the balance is pretty good. Anyway, I'll just show you what happens with this kind of self-leveling effect, which is quite curious, really. Give it a bit of throttle. You'll see, you turn one way or the other, these props are stopping, so it's going to endeavour to try and level out and go back to level, and of course it's got some dihedral, so that should actually help it level. The other rather strange thing is, if you point it upwards, it picks up speed, it wants to climb, which is slightly worrying, but we're going to have to see how that affects trying to fly it when I do eventually get round to maiden it. And the other test I did was, what happens if it goes out of range and loses the signal? And would it fly away? Well, in fact, what happens is the motor stops and it will just glide down, which is rather nice to know. Anyway, folks, that is it from me for now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe to catch the maidens of this little baby and the little Spitfire and little Stumpy that I mentioned before. And if you've enjoyed it, why not give it a like and check out some of the other stuff on my channel. Anyway, that's it for me for 2022. I wish you a good flying year for 2023, and hopefully I'll catch you all again in the new year. Stay safe and bye for now.